rain hadn't stopped since morning. Every black umbrella outside the church looked like a mourning crow, and the echo of footsteps on the marble floor filled the silence that followed my father's name being read aloud. I stood near the last pew, trying to make myself smaller. My brothers were up front, of course, tailored suits, wives whispering condolences, cameras flashing as though this were some magazine-worthy moment of grief. They'd always been the golden ones, the heirs, the pride of our father's empire. And I was the afterthought, the quiet son who never lived up to the family name. The lawyer, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, stood at the pulpit, his voice low and practiced. As per the final will and testament of Mr. Richard Calloway. Every head turned forward. I watched as the lawyer read each line, every itemized possession like a reminder of how much I'd never belonged. To my eldest, Jonathan Calloway, the primary estate, valued at $18 million, including the company Calloway Holdings. Jonathan's jaw tightened in a smug attempt to look somber. To my second son, Edward Calloway, the lakeside villa, all vehicles and residual shares, valued at approximately $12 million. There it was, applause without hands, pride dressed as grief. I kept my eyes down. Then came the pause, the kind that doesn't belong in a will reading, the kind that stretches seconds into years. And to my youngest, the lawyer said slowly, "I leave." He reached into a leather case and pulled out a small, dust-stained envelope. He didn't finish the sentence, just looked toward me. My stomach dropped. This. A ripple of whispers tore through the pews. My brothers exchanged glances, trying not to laugh. Their wives smirked. One of them, Edwards, muttered, "How poetic." The lawyer cleared his throat. "That is all, as per the late Mr. Calloway's wishes." That was all. 18 million, 12 million, and me. A forgotten envelope. I walked up slowly. The carpet muffled every step like the church itself was embarrassed for me. My hands were shaking when I took it. The envelope was yellowed, rough around the edges, and sealed with a faded wax stamp, the same crest our father had on his ring. For a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a letter, some explanation, something. But the look on my brothers' faces told me otherwise. To them this was theater. Outside, thunder rolled. People began filing out, talking quietly, avoiding my eyes. I slipped the envelope into my coat and left without saying a word. The rain hit like cold needles as I stepped outside. A few cameras clicked, reporters hoping for a scandal photo. I kept walking. The Calloway name had always drawn attention, the glamorous sons, the empire of steel and glass, the headlines about expansion, charity, luxury. But no one ever wrote about the quiet mistakes, the disappointments, the unwanted third son. My cab smelled like old leather and cigarettes. The city blurred through the wet glass as we drove away from the church, and I tried not to think about the last time I'd seen my father alive. It had been 3 years ago. We argued. He told me I was wasting my life. That art wasn't a career, that feelings don't pay bills, that he hadn't raised a son to paint houses and chase pipe dreams. I told him he hadn't raised me at all. He turned away before I finished. That was the last image I had of him, his back, framed by the doorway of his study. When I got to my apartment, a single bedroom above a cafe that smelled like burnt espresso, I sat at the table and stared at the envelope for 10 minutes. There was no name written on it. No instructions, just the Calloway crest cracked through the middle. I ran a finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. At first I thought it was blank. Then I saw the faint ink near the top. Only 2 lines. For the child who was never supposed to exist. And below it a bank account number. My pulse quickened. Was this some kind of joke, a final insult? I typed the number into my phone's banking app. It didn't belong to any known bank. When I tried searching it online, nothing came up, just an old financial institution name that had been dissolved decades ago. Something about it felt intentional, like a breadcrumb he wanted me to follow. I stared at those numbers for what felt like an hour. Never supposed to exist. Was he talking about me, or someone else? The next morning I woke to a knock on my door. It was still early, the kind of gray morning where time feels half asleep. I opened it to find an older man standing there in a dark overcoat, holding an umbrella. His face was weathered, but his posture sharp, military maybe. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "your father asked me to deliver something to you." He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small brass key. Old, tarnished, with the number *314* etched into the head. I blinked. Where did this come from? The will instructed me to deliver it the morning after the service. That's all I was told. "Do you know what it opens?" He gave a faint smile. "I'm afraid that's for you to find out." And just like that, he turned and walked back into the drizzle. By noon, I was sitting in a cab again, clutching the key like it might vanish if I let go. 314. The number burned into my mind. It wasn't an address I recognized. Not one of our properties, at least. My father had owned dozens, penthouses, villas, warehouses, but nothing with that number. Then, halfway through the ride, I remembered something. When I was a kid, my brothers used to mock me for sneaking into the company's main building downtown. I'd wander around while they sat in meetings with our father. There was a restricted floor, an archive level, I'd only been to once before security escorted me out. And I remembered the number printed on the elevator button, 314. The Calloway building still stood like a glass titan in the heart of the city, 40 floors of empire, arrogance, and legacy. I hadn't set foot there in nearly a decade. The receptionist didn't recognize me, of course. "I'm sorry, sir. Do you have an appointment?" "I'm family," I said quietly, "third son." Something flickered across her face, recognition, then pity. "Oh, I see. I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded, signed the visitor log, and stepped toward the elevators. The lights were soft, the air thick with recycled luxury. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored walls, tired eyes, damp hair, the kind of exhaustion that money never fixes. When the doors closed, I pressed the button for *31*. Nothing. Then I tried *14*. Still nothing. Finally, I pressed *3*, *1*, *4* in sequence. The panel clicked softly and a hidden keyhole revealed itself. My breath caught. I slid the brass key in. It turned smoothly. The elevator shuddered, lights flickering. Then it began to move slowly, quietly downward. Not up. The air grew colder. The hum of the machinery faded until all I could hear was my heartbeat. When the doors opened, the space beyond looked nothing like an office. It was dark, concrete walls, rows of locked drawers, old safes, and metal cabinets lined the room. A single desk sat in the center under a flickering light. On the desk was another envelope, and beside it, my father's pocket watch. My throat tightened. I walked forward slowly, the sound of my shoes echoing off the walls. The envelope was newer than the one from the will, clean, crisp edges. My name written neatly on the front in his handwriting. I reached for it, but my hand stopped midair. Something about being here alone, underground, surrounded by whatever secrets he'd buried, made me hesitate. What if it wasn't meant for me? What if never supposed to exist meant something entirely different? I forced myself to open it. Inside, a single photograph slid out, worn at the corners. It was a picture of a woman I didn't recognize, standing beside my father, smiling, and in her arms a baby. Me. On the back, written in his familiar handwriting. "Forgive me, I couldn't protect her." I stared at the photograph for a long time, as if the longer I looked, the more answers might crawl out of it. My father's hand was around the woman's shoulder, protective yet tense, like he was afraid someone would take her away. The woman looked young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and the sort of smile that belonged to someone who still believed in gentle things. But it wasn't my mother. That realization hit like a blade. My mother had dark hair, sharp features, the kind of elegance that filled rooms and intimidated everyone inside them. The woman in the photo had soft blonde curls and a warmth that felt entirely foreign to the cold marble halls I'd grown up in. I turned the picture over again, reading the words he had written. "Forgive me. I couldn't protect her." Her, not you, not me, her. The basement was quiet, but I could hear the faint hum of air vents above, the world continuing like nothing had changed. I sank into the chair beside the desk and ran a hand over my face. My pulse wouldn't slow down. If my father couldn't protect her, what had happened to her? And why had he kept her existence buried beneath 30 floors of steel and secrets? I looked back at the envelope. There was something else inside, a folded piece of paper. It was an address, a small town in Maine. Beneath it, in his same handwriting, 2 words, "Go there." By sunrise, I was already driving north. The city faded behind me in the rearview mirror, replaced by long stretches of road and endless pine. Every mile brought more questions. My brothers had their millions, their perfect lives. I had a photograph, a mysterious address, and a sentence that sounded like regret. It was enough. The GPS guided me to a narrow dirt road just outside a small coastal town. There were only a few houses scattered along the cliffs overlooking the ocean. I parked near the address and stepped out into the wind. The house was old, wooden, its paint faded to the color of forgotten summers. The porch creaked under my boots as I approached the door. It wasn't locked. Inside smelled of sea salt and dust. The furniture was covered in white sheets, sunlight leaking through cracks in the curtains. It felt like no one had lived there for years. On a table by the window sat a small glass box, and inside it, another key. My pulse picked up again. I lifted the box carefully. Under the key, a folded note. "You're close. Look beneath the floorboard by the fireplace." I glanced around the room. There was a stone fireplace in the corner, blackened by old ash. I got on my knees and ran my fingers along the wood until I found a loose plank. It came up easily. Underneath was a small metal tin. My hands were trembling when I opened it. Inside were 2 things, another photograph and a ring. The photograph showed the same woman again, this time holding a toddler on her hip. The child had my eyes, my exact eyes. The ring was heavy, gold, engraved with the Callaway crest. But it wasn't my father's. I knew his ring. This one was older, the crest slightly different, the design more intricate, as if it belonged to another branch of the family. I turned the ring over. There were initials etched inside. R.C. and E.M. My father's initials were R.C. Richard Callaway. But E.M. I sat back, staring at the ring. The realization came slowly, painfully, like a storm forming in the distance. If R.C. was my father and E.M. was her, then maybe she wasn't just someone he loved. Maybe she was someone he lost, someone they wanted him to lose. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned instantly, heart hammering. A man stood in the doorway, older, tall, with a weather-beaten face and the kind of calm that only comes from seeing too much. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You found it," he said quietly. "Who are you?" He took a step closer. "A friend of your father's, or I was, before they forced him to forget." I froze. "Forget?" He nodded. "There's a lot you don't know, son. Richard wasn't the man people thought he was." "That's an understatement," I muttered. He gave a faint smile. "You have her eyes, just like he said." "Her again." I took a breath. "Who was she?" The man's expression softened. "Her name was Evelyn, Evelyn Moore. Your father loved her before he ever married your mother." The air left my lungs. "They were together for years," he continued. "But his family, they didn't approve. The Moores were nothing compared to the Callaways. So your grandfather did what men like him always do. He paid her to disappear." My hands clenched into fists, and my father let that happen. He didn't have a choice. Not then. Your mother's family was already arranging the marriage. By the time he found Evelyn again, she had you. I stared at him. "Me?" He nodded slowly. "You were born in that house, right here in Maine. Your father tried to keep you both hidden. He bought this place under a different name, but when your grandfather found out, everything changed." "What do you mean?" The man's voice cracked slightly, as if the memory still weighed on him. "They came for her one night, told your father they'd take care of it. He tried to stop them, but he was too late. Evelyn didn't survive." The words felt like ice water running down my spine. "And me?" "They told him you were gone too, buried with her." I sank back against the wall, my mind spinning. My father had believed I was dead. He watched me quietly, giving me space to breathe through the storm. Years later, when your mother couldn't have children, your father adopted you, without ever realizing who you really were. My thoughts collapsed in on themselves, the will, the letter, the words, for the child who was never supposed to exist. I felt sick, he didn't know. All those years he didn't know I was his son. The man sat across from me, his gaze steady. He found out eventually, he said, maybe a year before he died. He came to me then, told me everything, said he wanted to make things right, but he didn't have time. Make things right how? He nodded toward the ring. That ring belonged to Evelyn. He wanted you to have it. And there's more, something he left behind for you. The key you found. It opens a vault at Callaway Holdings, but not the public one. There's another hidden. You'll find a ledger there dated long before you were born. I turned the ring in my fingers. The metal felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of every secret buried with it. Why are you helping me? I asked quietly. He hesitated. Because I was there that night, and I did nothing. He stood and moved toward the door, pausing before he left. Whatever you find in that vault, it'll change how you see everything. But be careful. Not everyone wanted this secret buried out of shame. Some buried it to stay rich. The door shut behind him, leaving me alone with the ring, the photographs, and a silence that felt alive. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind battered the windows, the ocean roared against the cliffs, and I sat at the old desk staring at the ring again. My father had lived an entire life haunted by ghosts he couldn't name. He debuilt an empire, buried his heart, and still found a way to reach me from the grave. I didn't know if I wanted revenge or forgiveness. Maybe both. By dawn, I made my decision. I was going back to the Callaway building. The drive back felt longer. The rain returned, heavier than before. It followed me into the city like a storm unwilling to let go. When I reached the tower, the lobby was nearly empty. The receptionist from before wasn't there. Good. I didn't want witnesses. The brass key still fit the hidden slot in the elevator. When the doors closed, I pressed the same sequence. 314. This time the descent felt different, heavier. When the doors opened again, the room was darker than before. Dust hung thick in the air. I walked toward the far wall, tracing my hand along the cold metal cabinets until I found a small brass lock identical to the key I'd found in Maine. It slid in easily. Inside was a narrow compartment. A single book lay within, its leather cover cracked with age. The ledger. I pulled it out carefully, brushing off the dust. The first page was filled with neat handwriting, financial entries, transactions, old company deals. But the names weren't just business contacts. They were family names. And at the bottom of the page, a signature I recognized instantly. R. Callaway. I flipped through page after page. Some entries had notes beside them, payments labeled hush, transfer, EM settlement. Then one page stopped me cold. It was dated the same year I was born. Transaction, house in Maine paid in full. Recipient E. Moore. Status silenced. My throat tightened. There was a number beside it, an account transfer to a company I didn't recognize. I took a photo with my phone, every detail, every number. Then I turned to the last page, written in the same handwriting as the letter I'd found in the basement. I never wanted any of this. I built a fortune to protect my children, but they buried the truth to protect their pride. If you're reading this, you already know who you are. Don't let them rewrite our history again. The ink stopped abruptly as if he'd been interrupted. My chest ached. I closed the ledger and looked around the dim room, feeling like I was standing inside the bones of his guilt. When I turned to leave, something on the desk caught my eye, a photograph in a cracked frame. It was my brothers, Jonathan and Edward, standing beside my father, and behind them, faint in the reflection of the office window, was a shadow, a figure holding a camera, the same man who'd given me the key. I left the Callaway Tower just before midnight. The city was washed in rain again, its neon reflections bleeding across the wet asphalt like watercolor. Every step away from that building felt heavier. The ledger was real, the proof undeniable. My father's sins, my family's lies, all buried beneath signatures and dollar amounts. Yet somehow the worst part wasn't discovering what he had done. It was realizing how much he tried to undo before dying. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had me trembling. I poured a glass of water, set the ledger on the table, and stared at the photo of my brothers from the vault. The reflection of that man holding the camera behind them wouldn't leave my mind. Who was he? The same stranger who had given me the key in Maine, or someone who'd been watching my family longer than I realized. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of the open ledger, tracing the words over and over like I could pull meaning out of their ink. At 3:14 a.m. That same number again, I flipped to the last page. The final entry wasn't from my father. It was dated 2 months after his death. The handwriting was different, sharp and clinical. It read, "Transfer completed, record sealed, final authorization J. Calloway." Jonathan, my brother had accessed this vault after the funeral. My stomach turned cold. All those millions he'd inherited, all the public grief he paraded around in front of cameras, it was all part of something bigger. Maybe he knew about Evelyn. Maybe he'd helped keep it buried. Maybe my father had tried to tell me, but Jonathan got there first. The thought hit like a slap. If he'd known who I really was, what would he have done to keep it quiet? I grabbed my phone and dialed the number of the man who'd appeared at my door, the one who had first delivered the key. He hadn't given me his name, but I'd taken a photo of his business card before he left. It only said Harlan Security Consulting with a private number. He answered on the second ring. "You found it," he said. "I did," I said. "And I found something else. Someone's been in that vault since my father died. Jonathan's name is on the last page." A pause, then a sigh. "Then it's starting sooner than I thought." "What's starting?" He didn't answer right away. "You're not safe now. They'll know you've seen it." "Who's they?" "The same people who erased Evelyn. The same ones who made sure your father could never speak about her again. Jonathan isn't working alone." My pulse jumped. "Then tell me who is." "You wouldn't believe me even if I did," he said quietly. "But if you want answers, meet me tomorrow at the old shipyard on Pier 17, noon. Bring the ledger." Before I could respond, he hung up. I spent the next morning trying to convince myself not to go. Every part of me screamed that it was a trap, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that this was the only way forward. My father had left a trail for me, and Harlan, if that was even his real name, was part of it. I just didn't know whether he was guiding me toward the truth or into the fire. By noon, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still bruised gray. The shipyard looked abandoned, cranes frozen mid-motion, rust eating through the metal skeletons of old cargo containers. The air smelled like salt and iron. Harlan was already there, standing near the edge of the pier with his hands tucked into his coat pockets. He nodded when he saw me. "You brought it." I held up the leather-bound ledger. "Yeah, now start explaining." He motioned toward a stack of crates. "Sit, this will take a minute." I didn't sit and talk. He studied me for a moment, then began. "Your father wasn't just running a business. He was protecting a list." "A list of what?" "Of people your grandfather destroyed," he said. "When the Calloway empire expanded, not all of it was legal. There were cover-ups, payoffs, people silenced. Evelyn wasn't the first, and she wasn't the last. Your father inherited all of it, the guilt, the evidence, the power. He wanted to fix what his father broke, but your brothers, they wanted to keep it buried." My hands clenched, so Jonathan knew. Harlan nodded. "Jonathan and Edward both. They've known for years. They just didn't know you existed until the will." I froze. "Until the will?" He nodded again. "Your father's real plan wasn't to give them money. It was to expose them. He structured his will so that each of you would inherit what you valued most. Jonathan got the company, which was already collapsing under the weight of hidden debts. Edward got the villa, which the bank technically owns. And you got the only thing that mattered, the truth." A wave of heat went through my chest. Then why didn't he just tell me when he was alive? He tried, Harlan said. But every time he got close, someone intercepted. You think those sudden heart problems of his came out of nowhere. He knew his time was short. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. So you were working for him? Not exactly, he said. I owed Evelyn more. I stared at him. You knew her. He looked away. I was the one who was supposed to protect her. The silence that followed was heavy. The waves slammed against the pier, filling the gaps between our words. What happened to her that night? I asked quietly. He took a long breath. Your grandfather sent men. I was supposed to escort her out of town, but I was young, stupid. I didn't think they'd actually hurt her. When I came back, the house was on fire. They said it was an accident. It was. I pressed my fingers against my eyes, trying to stop the image forming in my head, the flames, the silence, the life stolen before it had a chance to begin. She didn't die immediately, Harlan added softly. Your father got there before the police did. He saw her one last time. She made him promise to protect you. My breath caught. She was alive when he found her. Yes, and she told him something else. She said, they'll take him too, hide him where they'll never look. The ground tilted beneath me. So that's why he adopted me under my mother's name. Harlan nodded. He kept his promise, but he couldn't protect you forever. I looked out over the water, the waves breaking like glass. And now? Now they know you have the ledger, he said. They'll come for you, same as they did for her. That night I didn't go home. I checked into a small motel by the outskirts of town, the kind that smelled like damp carpet and stale coffee. I kept the ledger beside me on the bed, every page echoing in my head like a ghost whispering names. I couldn't run. Not again. If I wanted this to end, I had to bring it into the light. The next morning, I made a decision. I copied the key pages from the ledger, the transactions tied to my grandfather, the settlement to Evelyn Moore, the signature linking Jonathan to the posthumous transfer. Then I drove to the office of an investigative journalist I'd followed for years. Her name was Clara Jennings. She'd spent the last decade tearing apart corporations bigger than mine. When I told the receptionist I didn't have an appointment, she almost laughed me out of the building until I showed her the page with the Callaway crest and the note that said silenced. Within minutes, I was sitting across from Clara herself, a sharp-eyed woman with a recorder already running. Start from the beginning, she said. I told her everything. The will, the envelope, the key, the photograph, Evelyn, the fire, the ledger, Harlan. I didn't stop until my throat went dry. When I finished, she sat back, silent for a long moment, tapping her pen against her notepad. If even half of what you're saying is true, she said finally, this isn't just a scandal. It's a criminal legacy. I slid the ledger across the table. It's all true, and I can prove it. She opened it carefully, eyes scanning the pages. Her expression hardened. You realize what happens if this goes public. I nodded. Everything my family built collapses. Everything your brothers built, she corrected. You didn't build any of this. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe. Then maybe it's time someone tore it down. She nodded slowly. Give me 48 hours. That night I drove to my father's grave. The rain had stopped again, but the air was thick with the smell of wet earth. The headstone gleamed under the dim cemetery lights. Richard Callaway, 1949-2024. No epitaph, no words of comfort, just a name and a date, like that was all a man like him deserved. I knelt down and placed the ring beside the grave. You should have told me, I whispered. You should have told her, but I'll finish it. As I stood, I noticed something tucked behind the flowers that hadn't been there before. A folded piece of paper sealed in plastic. My name on the front. I pulled it out carefully, heart pounding. The handwriting was familiar, my father's again. If you found this, then you've done what I couldn't. I wanted to keep you safe, but the truth was never meant to stay buried. Trust Harlan. And if you must choose between the family name and the truth, choose her. Choose her. The words echoed in my chest long after I left the cemetery. 2 days later, Clara called. Her voice was electric with disbelief. It's bigger than I thought. You were right. Your brothers are in deep, offshore accounts, forged documents, even ties to shell companies that paid hush money. Will it hold up in court? I asked. Oh, it'll hold, she said. When this goes live, the Calloway empire burns. I hung up and sat in silence, staring out the motel window at the city lights flickering in the distance. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but all I felt was empty. The truth had cost everything: my family, my name, my peace. As the clock ticked past midnight, a knock came at the door. 3 slow knocks. I froze. When I opened it, no one was there. Only a single envelope lying on the doormat. My name again. Inside, one photograph, grainy, recent, taken from a distance. It was Clara, standing outside her office. And behind her, 2 men in suits I recognized from my father's old security photos. The photo trembled in my hands as I stared at it under the flickering motel light. Clara was frozen mid-step, looking over her shoulder, her face half caught between suspicion and fear. The 2 men behind her weren't strangers. I had seen their faces once in an old Calloway security directory, back when my father's company ran private contracts overseas. They were the kind of men you hired to make things disappear. My first instinct was to call her, but before I could, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My chest tightened as I answered. "Mr. Calloway," a voice said, calm and smooth. "You've been busy." "Who is this?" "Someone trying to save you from making a mistake." I gripped the phone tighter. "Where's Clara?" A pause. "Alive for now, but you're playing a dangerous game. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing." "Then explain them to me." "You're not fighting your brothers, son," the voice said. "You're fighting the foundation of your family's power. What your father built wasn't just a company, it was protection. For people who don't exist on paper, for debts that don't appear in banks. You're opening doors that were meant to stay closed." My voice cracked with anger. "You killed Evelyn. You erased her, erased me. And now you're threatening the only person trying to tell the truth. She died because your father defied the system that created him," the voice said. "Don't make the same mistake." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the silence in the room pressing in around me. Then I threw the phone onto the bed and grabbed my jacket. I wasn't going to wait for permission to save her. The night air bit at my face as I drove through the empty streets. Clara's office was downtown, the kind of building that looked respectable enough to hide danger behind polished glass. When I arrived, the parking lot was empty except for a single black sedan idling near the back exit. I killed my headlights and parked a block away. The moment I stepped out, I heard it: muffled voices, hurried movements, the metallic click of a car door. I crept closer, staying in the shadows. The sedan's trunk was open, and one of the men from the photo was loading something inside. Then I saw her, Clara. She was bound, blindfolded, her mouth taped, struggling weakly as the second man shoved her forward. Adrenaline replaced fear. I picked up a rusted metal rod from the ground and moved before I could think. The first man barely saw me coming. The rod cracked against his arm and he went down with a grunt. The second turned, drawing a gun, but I slammed into him, driving both of us against the car. The weapon clattered to the pavement. We fought in the rain, fists and elbows, until he caught me across the jaw hard enough to make the world tilt. I tasted blood but didn't stop. I grabbed the gun before he could and aimed it at him with shaking hands. "Untie her," I said. He stared at me, eyes cold, calculating. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Untie her," I repeated louder. He hesitated. Then he smiled, a thin, cruel line. "You think this ends with her. You think you're the first Calloway to turn on his own blood. You'll be dust before the sun's up." He lunged. The gun went off. The echo ripped through the lot. He collapsed. The other man crawled away, clutching his bleeding arm, disappearing into the dark. My hands shook as I dropped the gun. I tore the tape from Clara's mouth and pulled the blindfold free. Her eyes went wide as she saw me. "You shouldn't have come." "You're welcome," I said, forcing a shaky smile. She looked down at the man on the ground, then back at me. "We need to get out of here before someone else shows up." We climbed into her car and sped away, tires hissing through puddles. Neither of us spoke until we reached the edge of the city. The storm clouds had broken apart, leaving streaks of moonlight across the highway. My knuckles were still raw. Who were they? She asked finally. Callaway Security, I said. Old employees, my grandfather's ghosts. She exhaled slowly. They knew I had the ledger. I think they were waiting outside before I even left the office. Did they say anything? She nodded, rubbing her wrists. They said your brothers want to meet, that they'll make an offer. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, I bet they will. By dawn, we were sitting in a roadside diner, both of us running on stale coffee and adrenaline. Clara had her laptop open, the screen glowing faintly as she uploaded the documents from the ledger. Once this hits the servers, they can't bury it, she said. Even if they kill the story, there'll be copies everywhere. I nodded, staring out the window. Then what? What happens after the truth's out? She hesitated. Usually, people like your brothers resign, disappear for a while. Sometimes they get indicted. Sometimes they buy their way out. But the difference this time is you, the legitimate heir. You're the proof the entire inheritance was built on fraud. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Legitimate heir. After a lifetime of being told I was nothing, those words sounded almost foreign. Do you really think anyone will believe me? I asked. She smiled faintly. They won't have to. The evidence will speak for you. We sat in silence for a while, the clatter of dishes filling the space between us. Then her expression shifted, cautious. There's something you should know. Before those men grabbed me, I overheard a call. Jonathan's not in the city. He's flying to Washington tonight. Washington? She nodded. There's a private meeting scheduled with some kind of investor group. If he's desperate enough, he might be trying to sell what's left of the company before this story drops. My heart sank. If he sold Callaway Holdings, all the evidence, all the assets tied to Evelyn's settlement could vanish into another name, another shell. Everything my father tried to protect would be gone. I need to stop him, I said. Clara frowned. You can't just walk into his world. He'll have protection everywhere. I don't need to walk in, I said quietly. I just need to remind him who he's really dealing with. By nightfall, I was standing outside the Callaway private airstrip. The wind howled across the tarmac, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel. A single Gulfstream sat under the floodlights, engines humming softly. I could see Jonathan at the top of the stairs, talking to two men in suits. Harlan's voice echoed in my mind. You're not fighting your brothers, you're fighting the foundation. I approached the fence, keeping low, moving between the shadows of parked trucks. When I reached the gate, a guard stepped out of the booth, flashlight in hand. Before he could raise an alarm, I showed him my face. He froze. Mr. Callaway. Not the one you're thinking of, I said. I need to speak to Jonathan now. He hesitated. He's about to take off. Then he can delay, I said, slipping a folded envelope into his hand. Trust me, he'll want to hear what's inside. The guard opened the envelope just enough to see the document, a printed page from the ledger with Jonathan's signature at the bottom. His expression changed instantly. He stepped aside. You have 5 minutes. The interior of the jet gleamed like a museum piece, leather seats, polished chrome, soft light humming under the ceiling. Jonathan turned when he heard me step in. For a moment, disbelief flickered in his eyes, then amusement. Well, he said, look who finally found the front door. Cut the act, I said. You know why I'm here. He smiled, slow and cold. I imagine it has something to do with Father's bedtime stories, the ones he wrote in his precious little notebook. The ledger, I said. You forged entries after he died. He didn't deny it. I had to. You think anyone would trust our family if they knew the truth? He was losing his mind at the end, rambling about ghosts and guilt. Someone had to protect what was left. You mean protect yourself, I said. He shrugged. Same thing, you were never supposed to see any of it. Neither was Evelyn supposed to die, I said quietly. His expression flickered just for a second. You've been busy. I know everything, I said. I know who she was, I know who I am. He took a step closer, his smile fading. You think this makes you special? You're a mistake, Aaron. A secret father was too weak to erase. I did what had to be done. My hands clenched. You killed him, didn't you? He laughed softly. You think I'd dirty my hands for that old man? No, he did it to himself. Guilt's a poison, brother. It eats you from the inside. He turned toward the cockpit. This conversation's over. I reached into my jacket and tossed a flash drive onto the table. That's everything. The ledger, the transactions, Evelyn's settlement, your signature. It's already been sent to the press. By morning, you'll be headline news. He froze. I stepped back toward the door. Enjoy the flight, Jonathan. Maybe you'll land somewhere without extradition. As I turned to leave, he spoke again, voice low. You think you've won. But you have no idea what our name still protects. I don't need the name anymore, I said, stepping out into the wind. Just the truth. As the jet engines roared to life behind me, I watched it rise into the dark sky until it became nothing more than a fading star. The rain started again, soft, steady, almost peaceful. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. I felt real, whole, but deep down I knew this wasn't the end, because men like my brother don't vanish. They adapt, and the storm my father had tried to stop was only just beginning to turn toward me. The next morning, the city felt heavier, like it knew something had changed overnight. News headlines blared from every screen in the diner where I stopped for coffee. Callaway Empire under federal investigation. Jonathan's photo filled the frame, his signature smirk replaced by a mugshot of exhaustion. Clara's story had gone live before dawn, just as she promised. Every secret, every payment, every lie that had propped up the Callaway name was now public knowledge. I watched as reporters described the company's fall in real time. Shares frozen, accounts seized, properties locked down. It was strange, seeing the world unravel from the comfort of a plastic diner booth. Somewhere in all of that chaos, I should have felt victorious, but victory was a hollow word. All I really felt was the quiet weight of what it had cost. When I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Pier 17. One last thing your father wanted you to see. No name, no voice, but I already knew who it was, Harlan. The wind at the pier carried the sting of salt and smoke. The clouds hung low, gray and heavy. He was standing exactly where he had been the last time I saw him, coat collar turned up, watching the sea like it could answer old questions. You did it, he said when I approached. You burned the house down. It was already burning, I replied. I just stopped pretending it was. He smiled faintly. That's exactly what your father said once. I stopped beside him. You said there was something he wanted me to see. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small flash drive, sealed in a plastic sleeve. This was in a safe deposit box your father kept off record. I wasn't supposed to give it to you until it was all over. What's on it? Watch it for yourself, he said, but not here. I nodded, pocketed the drive, and turned to leave. Then his voice stopped me. You know, your father wasn't proud of what he built, Harlan said, but he was proud of you, even before he knew who you were. I didn't answer. Some truths hurt too much to carry out loud. Back at the motel, I closed the curtains and slid the flash drive into my laptop. The screen flickered, then loaded a video, grainy, time-stamped 6 months before my father's death. He sat behind his desk, the same office where I'd found the vault. His hair was thinner, his face worn. But his eyes were clear, steady, almost peaceful. If you're watching this, he began, then the truth has reached you. I couldn't save Evelyn. I couldn't save myself. But I can save you from becoming me. He paused, breathing hard. You were never supposed to inherit this empire. It was poisoned long before I took it, but blood has a way of binding us to ghosts. I tried to make peace with it, failed. You won't. You'll see it for what it is, a machine built to crush anything that threatens its illusion of control. Your brothers, the board, the investors, they're all part of it, but you're not. You're the fracture they never predicted." He leaned forward, voice trembling. "Your grandfather thought power meant protection, but real power comes from walking away. So when the time comes, walk away." He sat back exhausted. "I left something for you, in the cabin where Evelyn used to paint, beneath the floorboards. It's not money, it's a choice." The video ended. By the time I reached the old cabin, the sky was bleeding orange over the trees. The place was small, silent, filled with the scent of wood and rain. I pushed aside a rug near the corner and lifted a loose plank. Inside was a small tin box. Inside that, a letter. "Aaron, if you've come this far, then you've already done what I never could: face the truth. The choice I left you is simple." Inside the other envelope is a list of accounts tied to the last of the Callaway assets, the ones hidden even from your brothers. "You can use them to rebuild, to claim the name they tried to take from you. Or you can do what I couldn't: destroy it all, end the name, end the curse." Beneath the letter was a smaller envelope. I didn't open it, not yet. The air outside felt colder as I stepped onto the porch. The waves crashed against the rocks below, the sound steady and endless. I thought of Evelyn, of my father, of every person crushed under a name meant to command fear. Then I thought of Clara, still risking her life to keep the truth alive. What would walking away even mean? I pulled out my phone and called her. She answered after 2 rings. "You're safe," she said, relief in her voice. "They arrested Edward this morning. Jonathan's still hiding offshore, but it's over. You did it." "No," I said quietly. "We did it, but there's something else." "What?" I looked down at the unopened envelope. "A choice my father left me, to rebuild what's left or erase it completely." She was silent for a moment. "What do you want to do?" I looked out at the horizon, where the sea met the last light of day. "I don't know yet, but I know I can't rebuild it the way it was. It destroyed too many people to ever deserve redemption." "Then maybe you already have your answer," she said softly. That night I sat by the fire inside the cabin, the letter open on my lap, the smaller envelope beside me. I turned it over once, twice, then tore it open. Inside was a single USB stick labeled Project Heirloom. When I plugged it into the laptop, a folder appeared, thousands of files. Names, photos, bank records, offshore accounts, legal documents. Not just the Callaways, dozens of powerful families, corporations, politicians. Every secret my grandfather had kept as leverage. My father had copied everything. This wasn't just about us. It was about the entire system built on silence and blood money. I realized then that walking away wasn't enough. Destruction wasn't enough either. It needed to be seen, all of it. So I called Clara again. "I'm sending you something," I said. "Everything." There was a pause. "Aaron, are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "If this burns, it burns all the way down." 2 weeks later, the world changed again. The Callaway scandal became the spark that ignited a national investigation. Names that had been untouchable for decades were suddenly headlines. The files spread faster than anyone could contain them. Jonathan was arrested in Madrid trying to access offshore accounts. Edward turned himself in 3 days later. The Callaway name, once a symbol of power, now stood for corruption. And me, I disappeared, not into hiding, just away. I sold the last of my father's properties, donated what I could, and left the rest for the courts to pick apart. I moved to a small coastal town in Maine, the same one where Evelyn had once lived. The house by the cliffs was still standing. I fixed the porch, repainted the walls, kept the ring and the photo of her on the mantel. Some mornings, I'd walk to the edge of the rocks and watch the sea crash below. The air would smell like salt and rain, just like it did the first time I came here. And in those moments, I'd imagine my father sitting beside me, silent, finally at peace. One evening, I got a letter, no return address. Inside was a single line written in familiar handwriting. "You kept your promise." No signature, but I knew Harlan. I smiled for the first time in months. Years later, when people talked about the Callaway case, they always said the same thing, that it was the story that started everything. The story that proved no legacy is too big to fall. They never mentioned my name, and I preferred it that way, because I had learned something my father never could. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or power or even truth. It's the freedom to walk away. And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the waves below catching the last light like shards of gold, I finally whispered the words that had lived inside me since that day at the funeral. I forgive you. The wind carried them out to sea, where they belonged,